We are entering an era of slaying sacred cows. We are not entering an era where the sacred cows of old are preserved. We are entering an era where the sacred cows are going to be killed. And so what we are seeing are two sacred cows dying. One is the sacred cow of racial diversity, and I accept racial diversity. I believe in racial diversity. I don't reject it. I'm just giving you an observation of what I'm seeing, a sociological observation of what I am seeing, so don't strike me for this one, YouTube. Another sacred cow that we are seeing slowly dying is women's suffrage and feminism. This sacred cow is slowly dying, and we are seeing the beginning of the deaths of these two sacred cows. As time goes on, if this country is still in existence, we will see these sacred cows be completely dead. We are entering an era of the deaths of sacred cows. We are entering an era of slaying sacred cows. That's what we are transitioning to. Well, in Germany, they have a sacred cow, and the sacred cow is the Holocaust. Now, I believe that the Holocaust happened. I am not a Holocaust denier, so don't strike me for this one, YouTube. I'm just making a societal observation of what is happening. But there is a sacred cow in Germany, the biggest sacred cow, and that is the Holocaust. And so the sacred cow in Germany is the Holocaust. And because we are entering an era wherein sacred cows are being killed, slowly albeit, but they are being killed, then the sacred cow of the Holocaust will be killed. And it is slowly dying as we speak because of the rise of nationalism. This trend of nationalism and militarism is going to become stronger and more fanatical. And it's going to go from, well, we have to fight for Deutschland because we have to fight for democracy, to we have to fight for Deutschland because it's about blood and soil and the cosmic war between the Germanic race and the barbaric Slavic race, and the Germanic race and the Untermenschen, the foreigners who are in our borders. That's what it's going to turn into. And we are going to be seeing multiple Hitlers rise up. We are. So here is an article that was published recently by the New York Times, and it says here, I love the title for this article. After 1945, Germany constrained its army. He, meaning Friedrich Merz, is trying to revive it. Revive what? Remember what the Chancellor of Germany said recently, Friedrich Merz. He said, Germany is back. And I remember the Russians were asking the question. I was asking the same question. Back to where, Mr. Merz? Back to where? Back from where? The Third Reich? Germany is back. Because what he wants is for an unconstrained Germany. What the Germans want is for Germany to no longer have the American leash wrapped around its neck. They want to be totally unrestrained. They want to have no limits in their military spending. And they want to make the biggest military in Europe. And they want to be the biggest military power in Europe. They want to become a regional superpower in the European continent, wherein Germany's European neighbors will be joined together with the German Bundeswehr, or the German military. And the European militaries will be integrated in with the German military. Essentially, a Fourth Reich. Just like how in Nazi Germany or in the Third Reich, you had various military units from other European countries that were joined in with the German SS, or the Nazi SS. So you had the Waffen SS, and the Waffen SS had soldiers from all over Europe. It had soldiers from Albania or Kosovo. It had soldiers from Bosnia, Croatia, Ukraine. It had the German military, the Nazi military, had soldiers from the Baltic region. It had troops from all sorts of countries: Finland, Sweden, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium. You had Wallonians, Flemish. It was a pan-European military force. People sit there and talk about the Nazi military as if it was just solely a German military. It was definitely a German enterprise, but it was not a solely German force. It was not a homogeneous force from Germany. It was a pan-European force that was led by Germany. And that is exactly what the Germans want to revive. They want to revive this pan-European force that the Third Reich had. And so much of the Dutch military, virtually all of the Dutch military, has been integrated in with the German military. You can look it up. And I am shocked that that was not a massive story. I am shocked that that was not a big story. The fact that the Dutch military, virtually the entire Dutch military, got integrated in with the German military. Pretty amazing. So the European integration into the German military is already happening. And the Germans want to further that agenda. And the Germans also want to deepen military ties with other countries like Turkey. And as I've said before, Turkey is Israel's biggest existential threat. And Germany wants to deepen ties. Germany, the country that came the closest to exterminating the Jews, want to deepen military ties with Israel's biggest threat. It's like history is repeating itself. It's really quite surreal to see what's happening. But it says here, Boris Pistorius, Germany's defense minister, is pushing to expand its military in case tensions with Russia escalate. That's tricky in a country where the Nazi era casts a long shadow. And here's the thing, guys. Here is the thing. That shadow is not as long as it used to be. Oh, the Nazi era still is overshadowing the German society. That is not the case. It's still the case, but it's not as much anymore. Because the taboo against Nazism is dying. More and more people in Germany are saying, we were actually the good guys. More and more people in Germany are saying, actually, Hitler was a national hero. And this is happening primarily within the younger generation, the millennials, but the Zoomers especially. The Zoomers are becoming more, they're quickly becoming, I hate to sound so crude and so tasteless, but Germany's Generation Z is quickly becoming Generation Zyklon B. I mean, for real. They're becoming more and more nationalistic, more and more sympathetic towards the Nazi past. So it says here, ever since Germany reformed its military after World War II, the primary role of the German defense minister has been to maintain an army large enough to protect the country, but constrained enough to prevent a return to German militarism. So that has always been the custom. Even during the Cold War, which was the last time Germany had a massive army. The German army back in the Cold War was 500,000 people. That was the last time Germany had a massively sized army. It got reduced down tremendously after the Cold War. But even during the Cold War, the German military was still massively controlled by the United States. That control is weakening. It is being lessened. The leash is being loosened. And it says here, as Russia warns that it is ready for war with Europe, Mr. Pistorius' goal is to make Germany's military capable of leading the continent's defense in a major land conflict. So we're talking about a future conventional war between the Russians and the Germans. History does repeat. History does repeat. I mean, it doesn't repeat exactly. It does not repeat itself exactly to the T. But it does repeat itself, roughly speaking. And the reason why it repeats itself in regards to Germany versus Russia is very simple. It's because of the geopolitics. A lot of this has to do with the geopolitics. Germany is at the center of Europe. Russia is on the eastern end of Europe, on the easternmost end. It's really on the eastern hinterland of Europe. And Germany wants to become the center of European power. Russia wants to be a superpower as well. But Russia cannot be an empire if it does not control Ukraine. Germany cannot be the biggest power in Europe if it does not control Ukraine. That is the bottom line. Zbigniew Brzezinski talked about this. Zbigniew Brzezinski said that in order to be the most powerful country in Europe, in order to be the main power in Europe, you have to control Ukraine and Belarus. You have to. Ukraine, once you control Ukraine, then your empire consists of Eastern Europe and Central Europe. And then from there, you can control Western Europe. It's not that difficult. But you have to control Eastern Europe if you want to be the foremost power. The thing is that Germany is very close to Eastern Europe. It borders with Poland, which borders with Kaliningrad, which is Russia. And in order to become a powerful country in Europe, you have to control that region. The thing is that Russia borders with Eastern Europe. It borders with Ukraine and Belarus. So how is Russia going to become the prominent power? If Russia does not control Ukraine and Belarus, and if it does not control Ukraine, Russia is reduced to being just an Asian power. It's not a European power. It's not an Eastern European power. So Germany is right near Eastern Europe. Russia borders with Eastern Europe, and they both want to control Europe. How do you do that without controlling the breadbasket of Europe? Ukraine has the most fertile soil in Europe. It's the breadbasket. It produces massive amounts of wheat. So you have to control that. It has massive amounts of natural resources, oil, natural gas, lots of minerals. You're looking at endless amounts of money and resources. So you have to control that. So it says here that Germany wants to prepare the country's pacifist population for this new posture. All 18-year-old men, now check this out. This is very historical. This really has a parallel with history. All 18-year-old men will be sent a questionnaire requiring them to provide information about their wealth, their health and fitness, making it easier to identify potential recruits. So they're ready to bring back the draft. They want to bring back mandatory service is what they want to do. So it says here, this is one of the biggest social changes we have seen in many years in the areas of security and defense, Mr. Pistorius, 65, said in an interview. It affects a generation and future generations who have never had to deal with these issues because the threat did not exist, he added. The law is the latest in a sequence of moves that were unthinkable less than a decade ago, but that Mr. Pistorius has promoted in order to bolster German defense. Now, it's amazing. Almost 10 years ago, I warned people about this. I said this back in 2016. I said Germany's going to rise up. And almost no one believed me. Virtually no one believed me. They said, no, Ted, the Germans are weaklings. They're pacifists. They're never going to go back to militarism. And we're literally seeing this happening right before our eyes. We are literally seeing my prediction coming alive right before our eyes. It's quite profound. It's surreal to see this. It really is. In March, Mr. Pistorius helped lead a successful effort to remove limits on military spending from Germany's constitution. So they have no military spending limits. That's it. And Germany is already the first or the second biggest military spender in Europe. Already. They're already beating the British. They're already beating the French when it comes to military spending. Mr. Pistorius has also championed a stuttering effort to integrate Europe's militaries. Integrate Europe's militaries. Did you guys hear that? Integrate Europe's militaries. This is what I was telling you guys about. They want to integrate the various individual European militaries into the Deutsche military. That sounds like the Waffen SS. Oh, there was an SS unit from Norway, SS unit from Belgium, SS unit from the Wallonians, SS unit for Norwegians, for Swedes, for Finns, SS units for the Albanians and the Bosnians and the Ukrainians. That was what? That was pan-European military integration into Deutschland's military. And the Germans are talking about this. We want to integrate Europe's militaries. Into what? Into a pan-European military force that will be led by Deutschland. You know, there's a German rock band. What's it called? Rammstein. They made a song called Deutschland. It's like Deutschland über alles. And it's basically the national anthem of Germany that is rendered as a rock song. And I will say, it is a slapper. The song slaps, as the kids say. The song, it sounds good. It has a good rhythm, and it's like Deutschland, and it's a Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. Like, when I saw that song, I thought to myself, this has got to be a psyop. I mean, this has got to be a psyop. This is not they'll sit there and they'll bullshit people and they'll say, oh, well, the song is actually a critique of Germany and it's a critique of Germany's history. The hell it is. Bullshit. That song is done for the purpose of sparking national pride. Because damn well, when people are listening to that song, they're not thinking about the wrongs of Germany. They're thinking about how based Germany is. That's what they're thinking. But they're thinking based Germany. They're saying Hitler was based. I'm not saying that, YouTube, so don't mark me. All right, don't strike me. But that's what they're thinking. They're thinking that Hitler is based. The Nazis were cool. They're thinking the SS guys had the best uniforms. They're thinking that the Wehrmacht and the SS had aura. They're saying Hitler had aura. That's what this is. And so that song, in my observation, was a psyop. So that people could listen to it and think, hell yeah, I'm joining the Bundeswehr. I am joining the German armed forces. We're going to do Operation Barbarossa again. We're getting on the tank. If you listen, it is very easy to get young people to believe that war is cool. It's very easy to do that. It's very easy to get young people to believe that warfare is cool. And all you got to do is make them think in a very idealistic manner, get them to think idealistically as opposed to thinking realistically. Get them to think idealistically and get them to idealize the idea of war. Make them think that they're fighting for a great cause, that they're fighting for God and country, that they're fighting for some cause that's above them, that's above themselves. Make them think that they're going through a spiritual process of disintegrating and destroying their egos. That's the type of bullshit that they did back in World War II with the German military. They said, oh, you Germans, you're fighting for the fatherland and you're fighting for a greater cause, for the Führer, for the German race, and you're fighting for a cosmic mission, and that mission is Germany for the Germans. And we don't want no Slavs living in Germany. We don't want Jews living in Germany. We don't want Polish people or Russians living here. We don't want blacks living here. This has to be a solely Germanic land, and we are fighting for blood and soil. So once you get people to think in a cosmic way when it comes to warfare, it's very easy to get them to fight in war. Now, if you tell them that, well, you're fighting for NATO and democracy, no one gives a damn about democracy. They don't. In fact, I think that democracy is dying in the Western world. I do. I think that, and this is not going to be a change in the subject. This is going to tie into the greater subject at hand here. But I believe that democracy is dying in the Western world. I really do. And I believe that, and I've been thinking about this for a while now, I believe that we are going to return back to pre-democracy times. I think we are going to really kickstart a trend wherein we will be returning back to customs and to ideas that were very popular before a lot of these ideas that became very trendy after World War II and even before World War II back in the mid-20th century or so. So for example, all right, this idea that women should be treated as equals. I think that this idea is gradually dying. This is what I believe. This idea that we are, that men and women are 100% equal, this idea is dying. And what killed it was the SJWism. That's what killed it, was the SJWism. The SJWs came along and they said women can do everything that men can do. Everything. They can be in the military and they can be just as good of soldiers as men can. They can be just as good as warriors as men can. Men can get pregnant, which is bullshit. Again, people who reject God reject the obvious. This is a fact. Anyone who rejects God will reject obvious truth. Like, men can't get pregnant. Oh, who let the dogs out? So they start believing in that type of stuff. That very illogical, very unscientific, very unrealistic ideas. And they start saying things like men can get pregnant and all this stuff. So you had the rise of what is known as third wave feminism. And third wave feminism was just SJWism. Basically said that women are 100% equal to men. They can do everything that a man can. Construction work, oil pipeline work, oil rig work. They could do whatever. Fighting. They can do whatever a man can do. And then they started saying you have to call people by the genders that they want to be called by. So if a man wants to be addressed as a woman, you have to address this man as a she. You have to address this man as a her. If someone wants to be referred to as they and them, then you have to refer to them as a they and them. And they tried to force people to do this. They tried this in Canada, and that is what made Jordan Peterson very popular, because he was fighting against this agenda. And so what it did was it made the so-called left even more hated. And people started to look at the left, or the progressives, or the SJWs, and they began to say, wow, you guys want to destroy my rights. This whole LGBTQ thing is about destroying my rights, and we want nothing of it, and to hell with feminism. And feminism went from women should vote and they can become, they can become career women, to purple-haired lesbians who say that you should refer to them as a they and a them, and they have nose rings and they have dog collars on, they look sick. And so people started looking at that, and they started saying, that's the left. If that's the left, I want nothing of it. So what the SJWs did, and maybe this was by design, maybe this was a part of some sort of right-wing conspiracy, but what the SJWs did essentially was they killed the left. They killed it. So now feminism has a negative connotation. And people look at feminism and they say, I want nothing to do with it. I want nothing to do with feminism. Feminism is garbage. And then they start really thinking about this stuff. They start really thinking about, what were the consequences of allowing women to vote, right? This is what a lot of people are now asking. What were the consequences of allowing women to vote? And they start looking at the statistics, and they start looking at the numbers, and what they find is that women, for the most part, vote Democrat. Women overwhelmingly vote Democrat. And if you did not allow women to vote, then Republicans would win every time. Virtually every time Republicans would win if it was just men voting. If you just got rid of women's suffrage, then Republicans would win virtually every single time. And you see, I woke up to this reality many years ago. We're talking over 10 years ago. I realized, even before that, way before 10 years ago, a long time ago, ancient times, I realized that this whole idea of allowing women to vote was nonsense. In fact, I want to say when I was in high school, I came to this realization. I came to the realization that this whole women's suffrage thing was a terrible idea. It was a terrible idea, and it led to very destructive things like abortion and the embracing of Sodom. Now, you can sit there and say, well, men also share in the blame and blah, blah, blah. Yes, you're right. But part of that agenda, or really what led up to that, was feminism. Feminism was a part of the beginning stage that led up to the full embracing of Sodom. And so I remember, there's so much I can say about this. There's so much that I want to say about this. I remember back in the day thinking about, when I was in high school, thinking about the film Titanic and how Titanic was a garbage movie. Titanic is one of the most successful films ever made. It made like $1 billion gazillion. It made all these Academy Awards. It won all these Oscars. It was a super popular film. And I remember seeing the movie in theater as a kid and not really understanding much except that people were dying I mean, there was a boat, the boat was sinking, people were drowning. That's pretty much all I knew. But then I remember watching the film again when I was a little bit older, when I was a teenager, and thinking, okay, Jack is a homeless lowlife, Rose is a slut, and Cal's getting cucked. Cal's the one getting screwed over here. And Rose is the villain. And I remember coming to this conclusion when I was in high school. I was like, Jack's a lowlife scoundrel who gambles. Cal's successful. And Rose is a bitch. This was the conclusion that I came to when I was in high school. And yet, I began to observe, oh my God, women love this. Why would women, if women were so wholesome, I remember going to church and they would say, oh, you know, women are just, women want a Christian moral man. That's what they taught us in church. And that was a load of garbage. For the most part, a load of garbage. What I was hearing in church was extremely different from what I was seeing in high school. Women want a godly man. And then I would go to school and I would see the same girls that would go to my church going with lowlifes. You know, the lowlife dudes who had their pants hanging down. And, back in the early 2000s, it was very common for young men to have their pants dragged down. And you could see their boxers. And that was a big, big trend because they watched the rap music videos and they watched BET and they saw the rap music videos and they saw the rappers with their pants dangling down. And they said, oh, I'm gonna walk around with pants dangling down as well. I'm going to walk around with my underwear being exposed as well. And they thought it was cool. That was a huge trend back in the day. And anyone who is my age, anyone who was born in the 90s knows that this is the truth. And so I would go to church and I would hear, oh, yes, the women want this godly man. And then I would go to school and I would see the girls that I knew from church going with guys who had their pants dangling down. So what I heard in church was diametrically opposed to what I was seeing in reality. So they weren't really teaching us reality, which was quite sad because they could have told us about reality and it would have prevented a lot of disappointment in the future. But I remember thinking about Titanic in high school, and I began to put one and two together. I began to connect the dots. I began to say, wait, if women like that, if women love this movie, what does this tell us about modern day women? Let's be real here. It tells us that there's not a whole lot of great selections in the pool of women that we have in America, if that's what they're watching. And I remember, I'll never forget this. I remember I was in this school bus. I used to take the bus to school because I lived far away from the school. And so I had to take the bus to school and then I had to take the bus back home. And it was a long drive. Sometimes, depending on traffic, it could have been an hour-long drive to get home. Sometimes more, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes an hour and a half, depending on the traffic. But I remember I was sitting in the school bus and we were waiting for the bus to take off. And I was talking to this fellow student who I would talk to on the bus. And we were talking about the film Titanic. And I told this guy exactly what I just told you guys about Rose and Jack and Cal and how Cal was getting cucked and how Rose was a bitch and how Jack was a homeless scoundrel and how Rose cheated on her fiance to get banged by this guy that she had just met in a car, of all places. And he heard me and he said, damn, Ted, I never thought about it that way before. And it's like Americans, you see, I was raised by people from different countries. My dad comes from the Middle East. My mother comes from Mexico. So I was raised by people whose first language is not English. My mother's first language is Spanish. My father's first language is Arabic. So and I'm not saying this to say that I'm better than Americans or anything like that. I'm just giving you guys my cultural observation here. When people are raised by immigrants, or when they're raised by foreigners, they tend to have very different senses of awareness. They tend to be more aware of they tend to be more aware of certain things in the culture that they're living in than the people who are raised by native parents. So I was raised in the United States, but I was not raised by people whose first language was American English. And I just made, without even me really forcing this, I just made observations about certain things. And I thought that other people could see this, but I was wrong. And I was surprised that Americans did not see Titanic for what it was, and they didn't see all of the surging craze and popularity that was around this film for what it really represented. And what it represented, what the popularity around Titanic represented, was the fact that the modern day female culture in America is rotten. So this guy that I was talking to, this white dude that I was talking to, he heard my opinion on Titanic and he said, I never thought of it that way before. Oh my God. So I remember one day we were sitting in the bus, and this girl, also white, was sitting near us, and she starts talking to this white kid that I was talking to. And this kid says, let's just call him Jake for the sake of convenience. Jake says to this girl, you gotta hear Ted's opinion on Titanic. You gotta hear it. I never thought of it that way before. What Ted says about Titanic is something I've never heard before. And so I start explaining to this girl my opinion on Titanic, and she said, you hate Titanic? I can't believe it. Why would you hate that film? She was so shocked. She couldn't believe that I held this opinion on Titanic. Because she was so used to this American culture of feminism that she was like a fish in the ocean. The last thing that a fish knows is that it's wet. Now, being raised by foreigners is like jumping into a lake or an ocean and telling the fish that they're wet. That's what it's like. The fish are born in the ocean. You're not. The fish don't know that they're wet, but you do. So you start noticing things that they don't notice, is what I'm saying. And this girl was so oblivious to this reality. Like, you don't see Titanic for what it is. You don't see the popularity around Titanic for what it is. That it's a presaging sign, that it's an indicator that there's something really wrong with modern day female culture. So as I got older, I started noticing more and more this reality. And so when I got out of high school, I started looking more into feminism. You know, what feminism was, what it is. And I remember coming to the conclusion that women's suffrage was a terrible idea. And this was back in the early 2000s. And I remember in 2015, I decided I am going to sit down and I'm going to write an article on why I believe women's suffrage was a terrible idea. I wrote the article. And most people did not agree with me at all. Most people did not agree with me. Now what you're seeing is more and more people, especially young men, coming to this conclusion. They're saying, man, women's suffrage was a terrible idea. Once they realized that if you removed women's suffrage, that Republicans would win virtually every time, they came to the realization that women's suffrage was a terrible idea, just a terrible ass idea. And so women's suffrage is one of those things that we have held up as holy, as sacred. It's a sacred cow. But the thing is that the view that it's sacred is declining. And the view that is rising is one that says women's suffrage was a mistake and it should be dismantled. That's another thing. Or that's one thing. Another sacred cow that I think is going to be dismantled, if America lasts this long, is diversity. Diversity is another sacred cow that is gradually dying. And what killed it was the same thing that killed feminism, or the left, I should say. What killed it was the SJWs. It was the third wave feminist. It was the woke crowd. And wokeism came along, and they said, you have to make every white character black, right? Every white superhero, white historical figures, famous white historical figures, you have to make them black. And what they did was they tried to force this idea of toleration. They tried to force this idea of racial equality or racial inclusivity, where they said, James Bond has to be black, Batman needs to be black, Superman needs to be black, everyone needs to be black. And what that did was it turned people off. Before wokeism, people had no problem with racial diversity. They didn't. If they had a problem with it, films like Rush Hour 1 and 2 would have never been successful. Films like Lethal Weapon, where you have Mel Gibson and Jamie Glover, whatever his name is, Jamie Glover, who's African American, being police partners, would have never been popular. Lethal Weapon would have never been popular. But it was popular. Why? Because Mel Gibson and Glover had great chemistry. And Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan, they had great chemistry in Rush Hour 1 and 2. And people loved it. And the thing is that those films and really the combining of those characters, Chris Tucker, Jackie Chan, or Mel Gibson and Jamie Glover, right? Those characters were done naturally. They weren't forced. They were put together selectively, and they were put together because they worked well together, and they had a good vibe, and people liked it. People liked these characters. And so it wasn't forced. And any time you try to force something, right? You could say we want people to forcefully, we want to coerce people. We want to really pressure people into accepting Sodom. We want to pressure people and coerce people into accepting DEI and wokeism. It just doesn't work, because people have a sense of individuality and they have a sense of freedom that they want to preserve. And once they feel like something is forced, they hate it, they reject it. And so the idea of racial diversity has become almost synonymous with wokeism. And because of that, racial diversity is now becoming less and less popular. The idea of racial diversity is becoming less and less popular, and more people are disliking it and hating it and really just despising it. And so what we are seeing are two sacred cows dying. One is the sacred cow of racial diversity, and I accept racial diversity. I believe in racial diversity. I don't reject it. I'm just giving you an observation of what I'm seeing, a sociological observation of what I am seeing, so don't strike me for this one, YouTube. Another sacred cow that we are seeing slowly dying is women's suffrage and feminism. This sacred cow is slowly dying, and we are seeing the beginning of the deaths of these two sacred cows. So as time goes on, if this country is still in existence, we will see these sacred cows be completely dead. And I think we're just going to go back to the way things were before those sacred cows were established. That's what I believe. That's what I truly believe. How does this apply to what's happening in Europe? How does this apply to Germany? Well, in Germany, they have a sacred cow, and the sacred cow is the Holocaust. Now, I believe that the Holocaust happened. I am not a Holocaust denier, so don't strike me for this one, YouTube. I'm just making a societal observation of what is happening. But there is a sacred cow in Germany, the biggest sacred cow, and that is the Holocaust. And that sacred cow has been there, and it's been very powerful since the end of World War II. But we are entering an era of the deaths of sacred cows. We are entering an era of slaying sacred cows. That's what we are transitioning to. And so the sacred cow in Germany is the Holocaust. And because we are entering an era wherein sacred cows are being killed, slowly albeit, but they are being killed, then the sacred cow of the Holocaust will be killed. And it is slowly dying as we speak because of the rise of nationalism. So as that transpires, as that progresses, as that process continues on, then this trend of nationalism and militarism is going to become stronger and more fanatical. And it's going to go from, well, we have to fight for Deutschland because we have to fight for democracy, to we have to fight for Deutschland because it's about blood and soil and the cosmic war between the Germanic race and the barbaric Slavic race, and the Germanic race and the Untermenschen, the foreigners who are in our borders. That's what it's going to turn into. And we are going to be seeing multiple Hitlers rise up. We are. And I wouldn't be surprised that in the future, America is just going to become a totalitarian country. We are seeing more and more people saying things like the Constitution is irrelevant, that the Constitution is outdated. We are seeing more and more people saying things like, well, the Constitution, it was good for its time. It was good for the 18th century. And when the Constitution was written, it was written for a certain culture. It was written for a moral culture. In fact, one of the founding fathers, I believe it was Mr. Adams who said this, said that the Constitution was written for a moral and religious people. And it was. You can't have an orderly observation of the Second Amendment without morals. If you have the Second Amendment and you don't have a Christian culture to regulate it, then people are just going to go crazy with it. They're going to buy guns all the time, and they're going to shoot people and do mass shootings like we're seeing right now in America. You can't have freedom of speech without a religious culture to regulate it, without having a culture where people are just saying any reprobate thing that they want to say. If you have a First Amendment without a religious culture to temper the First Amendment, what you end up with is what we have right now. What you end up with is exactly what we have right now, and that is people just saying, well, we can say whatever the hell we want. We can say whatever reprobate thing that we want. We can promote Sodom. We can advance evil and demonic agendas, and it's all under the banner of freedom of speech. So yes, the Constitution, the amendments were definitely written for a religious and moral people. Without that religion to temper the Constitution then becomes used as really a green light for whatever immorality you want to advance and percolate. So people are going to say, and people are already saying this, that the Constitution is outdated and that we need to just throw the Constitution out the window and rewrite a new Constitution. In fact, there is a former general by the name of General McGregor, Douglas McGregor. And Douglas McGregor became very popular in 2022 because of his commentary in regards to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Russo-Ukrainian war. Douglas McGregor is, well, a former general, so he has a lot of knowledge on military tactics and strategy. He also has a lot of knowledge on the Russian military, on Russian military capabilities, and also the Ukrainian military as well. So he has been a great source of knowledge, and he has been very informative when it comes to the Russo-Ukrainian war. But Douglas McGregor has his own agenda. He has a very insidious agenda. Like I said, he became very popular due to his knowledge on the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. And so a lot of people started to turn to Douglas McGregor to be informed as to what was happening and what is happening in Ukraine right now. But McGregor is very anti-NATO. Why is he anti-NATO? You can say, well, he's against war. And that may be true, right? He may be against war against Russia, but McGregor has his own insidious ideology and agenda. McGregor has recently said that the Constitution is outdated and there should be a new Constitution written. And he also talks about how we need to keep America majority white. He talks about how we need to make sure that America stays... he talks about how America needs to become nationalistic. He talks about the importance of preserving the gene pool. He's getting into social Darwinian language. He's getting into eugenist language. And what he is promoting is really a form of, you could say, American Nazism. And so the fact that that guy is popular and what he is saying is popular, I think is really it's really a canary in the coal mine type situation. Sorry, my English today is really shitty. Where the fact that type of language is popular bespeaks that there is it really bespeaks and it indicates that something very diabolical is rising up in the Western world. And that demon that is rising up is the demon of fascism. It's the demon of Nazism. It's coming back, is what I'm saying. And we could see a Nazi-like state being established here in the United States. We could actually see that happening. where ultranationalism and American militarism will be the law of the land, and where things like racial toleration will be utterly rejected and looked down upon. And if you ever even express that you think that racial toleration is okay, you will be seen as an enemy of the country. I could totally see this happening in the United States, not 5 years from now, but maybe in the next 10, 20 years, maybe 15, 20 years from now, you can see something like that happening. And people are going to say, this Constitution, where did it bring us? It brought us to where we are right now. And where we are right now is not where we want to be. We want to be in a nationalistic society, and we're not in a nationalistic society. We're in a liberal society, and freedom of speech brought us here, and all these rights brought us here. And so we have to get rid of this Constitution, or we have to reform the Constitution in some way to fit the culture of the times. And the culture of the times, the zeitgeist, so to speak, is nationalism. And so I think this is going to happen in Europe. I think the Europeans are going to more and more become very out in the open with this idea that the post-World War II order brought us nothing but mass migration, and we need to get rid of it. We need to remove the post-World War II era. Well, what is at the center of the post-World War II era? What is at the center of the post-World War II era is the Holocaust. That is the cornerstone of the post-World War II establishment. It's the Holocaust. It's the idea that we never want the Holocaust to happen again. So how do we prevent another Holocaust? Well, we put American troops in Europe. We make sure that German militarism never gets revived. This is why Germany's military has always been under the control of the American Empire since the end of the Second World War. We make sure that Germany remains denazified. We make sure that education on the Holocaust always remains an established custom in Germany. We always make sure that things like Holocaust denial are illegal in Germany. We have to make sure that these laws and that these customs are intact in order to preserve the post-World War II tradition. The cornerstone of the post-World War II tradition is that Hitler was evil and the Holocaust happened. That's the cornerstone. So if the Germans are going to shatter, and I'm not saying this because I think this is a good thing, I'm simply making a societal observation based on my knowledge of history, so don't strike me, YouTube. But what is going to happen in Germany, and what is going to happen really in much of Europe, especially Central Europe, Northern Europe, is people are going to say, we have to slay the sacred cow of the post-World War II era. And the sacred cow is the Holocaust. Let's just forget about the Holocaust. Let's just say that it didn't happen. And let's make Hitler into a good guy. Let's make him into a national hero, or really a continental hero. And like I said, we are entering an era of slaying sacred cows. We are not entering an era where the sacred cows of old are preserved. We are entering an era where the sacred cows are going to be killed, and new sacred cows are going to be established. The new sacred cows are going to be nationalism, ultra-nationalism, ultra-fanatical militarism, racism, and really this idea of blood and soil. These are going to be the new sacred cows, and they're not really new. They're old sacred cows that were slain through the process of the Second World War and denazification. And they are simply being brought back from the dead. That's it. That's what's happening. The bringing back of old sacred cows and the slaying of the most recent, or the most recently established sacred cows. That's really what we're facing. That's what's happening. So as nationalism and militarism become more popular and more fanatically believed, the militarism in Europe, the nationalism in the Western world is going to become more and more intensified and more fanatical. That is what we are facing.